I'm going to review some of my blog posts for people on YouTube. This post called Social Rules is from 2.5 months ago. I haven't reread it since then, so I'm going to be reviewing it in the video. I'll read some of it out loud. Social rules are one of the most powerful enemies of reason. I think that first sentence is important because a lot of people aren't really on the lookout for social rules as a major problem, as a major foe for their rationality. They're like, I want to be rational and unbiased, but then they don't take social rules seriously as one of the things that will stop them and make them fail. A lot of people are like, well, I just need to learn some rational philosophy and then I'll be rational. But they don't know what things will prevent them from being rational that they have to fix. There are some that they know about. They know about emotions. So they know if I'm emotional, that could make me irrational. So they know getting their emotions under control, managing them, improving them, not getting angry so easily, stuff like that can help with being a rational person. And they know that certain social customs and conventions can be a problem, like getting drunk at parties, although a lot of people who are into reason think they can just get drunk at parties and it's fine. But some people realize that that's a very different sort of way of living your life than being a scientist or a scholar or something. They think they can do both, though, just be a scientist for their day job and then be a drunken partier for their night job. And that does not work well. It's hard enough to be rational if it's your main focus. So it's virtually impossible if you're going to do it half time and then be irrational half the time. That's grossly unrealistic. And some people recognize that regarding partying and drinking and stuff. At least for excessive drinking, not mild drinking. Another thing people recognize as a potential enemy of reason is religion. They know if you're religious, that's something you might have to give up or change or at least adapt in some way in order to be very rational. You can't be superstitious. You can't believe in UFOs and ESP and astrology, fortune telling, star signs, tarot cards, ghosts. So there's some bad luck is another one, in karma, and heaven and hell. So there's a bunch of things people see as incompatible with reason. So they're like, you have to get rid of those things or fix them or, do something about that if you're that kind of person and you want to get into reason. But then social rules are not generally on the list. People think knowing how to be polite to someone and having that be an automated habit that you talk to people in a polite way is totally harmless and good. They don't realize how restrictive that is for how you think and how critical your speech is and how much you speak the truth and speak honestly. Being honest is a big part of being rational, and social pressures frequently pressure people to be dishonest. Instead of being as clear as you can about what you think the truth is, you're supposed to hold back and hide some of your opinions to avoid conflict with other people. This conflict avoidance behavior is a major part of our culture's social interaction rules and methods. And it is contrary to reason and truth-seeking. Alright, next part. They aren't all bad, meaning social rules aren't all bad. They have some useful purposes. But regardless of the upsides, they have huge irrational downsides. The useful purposes are helping structure or organize how people interact. This gives people more of an idea of what to expect. People don't realize what it'd be like dealing with a stranger with no customs to guide the interaction. That's actually a really hard problem. Our social rules handle it pretty well. That would be a lot like meeting an alien. And the alien, they're from their own world, and they don't understand your customs, and you don't understand their customs. It's a little like going to a foreign country a long time ago when the countries were more isolated. If you're the first Westerner to visit Japan, you don't speak the language, and you don't understand how they live and how to get along with them and so on. So social rules provide some structure. It makes interaction not just free form, make everything up completely ad hoc as you go along, from the possibility space of all possible ways of interacting with other people. It narrows it way, way down and it gets both people on the same page about how it's being narrowed down to a reasonable approximation. So there's definitely useful things there. Everyone has a mutual concept of like civilized behavior that they mostly roughly approximately follow, and this helps people get along and not fight with each other. And some social rules, like civilized behavior, say things like don't punch each other and don't grab each other's property and take it away. Those things are not oppressive. They're not very restrictive. Like, you can still be a scientist. They're totally compatible with reason. They don't block you off of important things in life. Whereas, like, not saying anything negative. Like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Like, that rule of thumb, that is anti-truth. It's preventing speech. It's suppressing ideas. So that's the kind that's dangerous and bad. And there's a lot of social rules are unwritten, and people don't have a very clear idea of what the social rules they live with are. So they follow all these rules, but it's like the unexamined life that Socrates talked about and said wasn't worth living. They don't understand what rules they follow in their life and why and how they work. And if you don't know what social rules you're following, what you're doing socially, then it's hard to evaluate, is this dangerous? Is this a problem? Is there something bad here? And so there's a lot of social stuff that people aren't aware of. I meant to say subtle stuff. There's subtle social stuff that is really quite a problem, and people don't know about the problem because they don't even know what's going on. It's not that they know exactly what they're doing and then they evaluate it positively. There's bits and pieces of that, but the main issue is they don't know what they're doing, so they're not in a good position to evaluate it. All right, reading further. People who violate those rules still use many social customs, such as greetings. Oh wait, I skipped a paragraph. When people are antisocial, it's only a small portion of social rules which they violate. For example, they say taboo words like retard, or they say something bluntly when you're supposed to tell white lies about or avoid saying anything about. People who violate those social rules still use many social customs such as greetings like hi and farewells like bye, or understanding and using the conversational dynamic of questions and answers. Right, so structuring a conversation as this is a question, this is an answer to the question, that is a convention that our culture has. It's social, it's related to how to interact with other people, how to get along with people. And that one is useful. The question and answer dynamic helps us understand each other better and have better conversations. It helps us with truth seeking. It's useful to scientists. So there's plenty of good social rules. Greetings and farewells are mixed. Like, people overdo them sometimes. They kind of waste time on them. Like, there's things to complain about there, but they can also be useful. There's definitely sometimes a purpose to saying hi and bye. Like, sometimes the person doesn't know you're there, so if you say hi, now they have the option to talk to you instead of not realizing you were there. So it can be useful. Same with bye. Like, now they realize that you're not there anymore, so they can give you something or tell you something before you leave, and they cannot expect to see you later, and there's information there. But sometimes it's unnecessary. Sometimes they don't care if you come and go because you don't know them very well, or they're doing something else. You could overdo the greetings and the farewells and waste time on it, and I think sometimes people do that. But the greetings and farewells are not a major threat to reason. Like, the worst case scenario is kind of like wasting some time rather than being irrational. I mean, worst case is a strong word, so I shouldn't have said that, but a standard negative scenario is some time wasted. There's ways to take greetings and farewells further. Like, when people go on stage, like performers, they often do a greeting kind of ceremony where they strut onto the stage, or they play some music while they come out, or you get this with like professional wrestling. Not professional, like the fake type, WWE or whatever it is. Like the actors who pretend to be wrestlers. So it's like a performance and they're trying to hype it up and whatever. Whenever they like walk up to the ring, they're always like raising their hands in the air and like high-fiving the audience and wearing a costume that they rip off when they get there and stuff like that. So that's like an advanced version of hi, where they're putting more effort into it. And you can imagine like a worst case scenario where people are always trying to impress each other with fancy highs, and it takes like a bunch of time and effort that is a major like priority in their life because they feel social pressure to do the most impressive things, and it's like a constant competition. So that could like really distract from learning and science and so on if people got super involved. But as long as the highs stay like, you just say hi and that's kind of it, and you're not pressured to like escalate it to better things, like as long as you can keep saying hi instead of coming up with new and fancier greetings, then the downside is roughly just wasting a bit of time. All right, moving on. The small portion of social rules which are commonly violated are not very important. The really important stuff is pretty uncontroversial, particularly in intellectual conversations. In those conversations, people may be rude or insulting, but it's basically nothing like trying to talk really savage or barbarian who is ignorant of civilized modes of interaction. Politeness helps reduce violence among semi-civilized people, but we're so civilized today in America that we really expect people to be able to refrain from violence even if they're insulted. We think it's barbaric to duel over honor. Right, so in the past, like being polite would help avoid fights, but today, even if you're rude, people shouldn't fight, so some of it becomes partially unnecessary. Social rules, communication rules, limit what you say. The limiting makes it harder to say certain ideas. Some of those ideas are true. Being able to speak freely lets you better focus on speaking the truth without worrying about other factors. Right, so in general, things that suppress speech make it harder to just pursue the truth and reason and not worry about anything else. Anything extra is like a distraction. And if it gets in the way of saying certain things, it can be a real problem. And in general, social rules make it harder to say negative things and push people to say more positive things. And that is bad for critical thinking and critical discussion where we're trying to find and correct errors. The basic goal of truth seeking is to look for errors and fix them. So social rules get in the way of that. Some truths are hard to say politely because socially you're just not supposed to say them. For example, people lie all the time, but you're not supposed to point it out. Thinking people lied is common, but saying so is considered an aggressive attack, regardless of whether it's true. What if you want to point out lies so that people can learn to stop lying? What if the goal is improving in many ways, including integrity? Then social rules make that hard. This is a problem I run into. People lie a lot. I think it's important. I wrote an article about lying to help people understand it better. And so I think part of the project of being a rational philosopher needs to be receive criticism of your lies, have your mistakes, your lies pointed out to you. And so you can be like, oh shit, my bad. I'm going to investigate how that happened and try to change. If no one's pointing out your lies to you, it's harder. You have to find all your lies yourself. However, people mostly, for social reasons, take it really badly when you criticize their lies. There's a lot of criticisms that people don't take super badly and they're like more okay with, and then there's some that they take worse. And pointing out ways that they're lying or biased are things that people really commonly take really badly, and it's hard for them to learn about or make progress or fix because of that. So social rules get in the way. Also, be aware, social rules, people internalize them. Like, to be in the constant habit of treating people a certain way, people learn to think that way. It's just how they think, so they treat themselves that way too. So, people who never call anyone a liar, they're also really bad at calling themselves a liar. They're not just... So, it's not just they find fear of other people's lies because they're not looking because they wouldn't say it. So it's not just that they like spot all the lies but don't say them. They also stop looking for lies as much because they can't say them, and it sucks to like find all these things you're not allowed to say, and that's like running into friction and clashes with your culture. And so most people just stop looking for the lies that they wouldn't say anyways. And they do this not just with other people but with themselves. They don't want to hear about their lies, so they don't look for the lies themselves. It's not just that they don't want other people to say their lies. They take it badly if they find a lie of their own because it's rude and whatever. So they have a very negative view of finding out about such information. So it doesn't just suppress external criticism, it suppresses internal criticism too. So social rules cause people to take offense rather than rationally analyze what was said, sometimes. Social rule following involves a way of evaluating statements as polite or rude, which people do before and often instead of evaluating whether the statement is true. This is contrary to truth-seeking. It causes people not to think about whether a criticism is true or not if they find it personally offensive. There's an interesting issue about what to blame. Did the social rules teach people to get offended by insults? Or were they already offended by insults and the social rules just help avoid triggering that underlying flaw? It doesn't matter that much. It's all culture. Like, our culture teaches us multiple sides of it. Like, it teaches us to get offended by things, and it teaches us to be polite. Regardless, one can group it all together under the general heading social dynamics or social rules related issues and say there's a problem there. Many problems occur because social rules are unwritten rules, which people treat as automatic, expected default. They won't say what offends them or what rules they want to be treated by. Actually, they often pretend they are willing to hear any criticism, but still expect social rules prohibiting some criticism to be followed. If people said, "I am fragile," and get offended by things I perceive as insults, we need to somehow accommodate this flaw of mine in our discussions, then they'd be easier to deal with, but they don't honestly face the reality of their situation. The main things that offend people are criticisms that imply they are bad in some way. This includes being incompetent at something where the social expectation, the general default expectation of our society or culture, is that adults are competent at it. It also includes being dishonest, being bad at thinking, having immoral ideas, being dumb, not understanding something that people think only a dumb person wouldn't understand, making dumb mistakes, dumb according to social perception, not objectively, and being irrational. So those are the kinds of things that are hard to tell people, they're hard to fix, because people find them so offensive. But people are irrational, dishonest, dumb, incompetent, because our culture's expectations about skill are actually unrealistic and high in some ways, and low in other ways. They're not very accurate. Those are crucially important issues for anyone trying to be a rational thinker. People need criticism of those issues. They need to get better at those things, not avoid discussing them. So social rules block intellectual progress. The thing about social rules, this essay doesn't fix this problem, is that people don't know what most of them are. It gives some examples and it talks about like politeness and offending people. And like those are social rules, but there's a lot more of them and there's a lot of subtle ones. It's very hard to show people what they are and explain them. There's a lot of body language and gestures and facial expressions related to social interaction. And it's very hard to get people to like carefully analyze it and actually learn what's going on when people socially interact. I've made some videos about it, like watching people and like pointing out some of the social stuff they're doing, or analyzing a song or a video clip or stuff like that. But there's a lot to learn there. And if you really want to learn it, you have to study a lot. You have to look at it from many angles, including it is unrealistic to get very good at this without reading the book Girls Chase. The full name is How to Make Girls Chase. This is an example of a pickup artist book which deals with social dynamics. Not just about dating, although that's the emphasis, but there's a lot of general purpose social dynamics. One of the ideas in this book, which you don't get elsewhere, is called the law of least effort, which says whoever is perceived as putting less effort into something is higher social status. This is very anti-truth seeking. It's anti-effort. There's a sort of default assumption in our society that people don't want to do effort and they would avoid effort if they could. So if you're doing effort, it's because you don't have a choice. You don't have the resources, the hirelings, whatever, to avoid doing the effort. You don't have your life set up in such a way to avoid effort, which is the presumed goal that you haven't reached yet. So that attitude is very prevalent and very nasty. If you learn to recognize thousands of examples of it, to see it everywhere without even thinking about it, just like you get to the point you've practiced seeing it enough that you like notice it automatically, habitually, that'll make a big difference in how you perceive things. But just learning the rule like as an abstract principle isn't going to do much. You have to discuss and analyze and spot and seek out dozens and dozens of examples if you really want to understand how it applies to many, many different situations and how common it is and so on. So this is just one of the many, many things you can study if you actually want to understand social rules. They're a big part of your life. You ought to study them, but most people are unwilling to. They don't want to face it, and they don't want to be honest about it, about what they do and what their friends do and why, and what it all means. Because although there are certainly a variety of good things in social rules, like the question and answer dynamic, I think is a good one. Which is not a hard rule, by the way. Rule is maybe not the best word. You could call it social dynamics, which is what the PUA people use. One of the largest companies is called Real Social Dynamics. But anyways, questions and answers are not hard rules. Like, it's not like you must obey the rule of the question and answer pattern. Sometimes people respond to a question and they don't give an answer. They say something else, like they ask their own question. They're more like guidelines. The enforcement for social dynamics or rules is variable. Like, you can get away with breaking a lot of them if you have high social status, or the other person doesn't mind, or it depends on the situation. But there are enforcement for some things some of the time. And the enforcement can be pretty harsh. Like, many people go through middle school and high school quite miserable due to, essentially, social rule enforcement by their peers. They're not doing certain social dynamic correctly, and it's being enforced. They're being pressured and made miserable. Their life is worse because they're being treated in a negative way for not being adequately socially calibrated to what other people want. It's not the only reason people are miserable in school. Like, I don't want to take any credit or responsibility away from the teachers and the administrators, who are broadly awful, but that is another topic. All right, moving on real quickly, I'm going to go through 3 more short posts. This one is called Curious Progress. I wanted to document my writing for a month. So I posted word counts that I wrote for a month, and I posted topics as well, so you could see what I was writing about, what I was doing, so people could like follow my work better. At the end, I added it up. It was like 2251 words per day average, and those are not replies. They're not discussion posts. They're just like essays and things where I take the initiative and I'm like writing by myself. They're sort of like independent things that I think are forward progress, as opposed to like answering a question from a fan or something. I would not count under the word count. So in general, anything where I'm interacting back and forth with people was not included here, and I wrote 2250 a day, so that's pretty high, I think. I do philosophy a lot. A lot of authors of fiction novels, which are easier, are like 1,000 words a day or less is their goal. And like with this stuff, for some of it, not all, but some, I'm inventing ideas as I go along. Like, I'm not just writing, I'm doing philosophy research and pioneering new concepts, which makes it slower. All right, so that's that thread. This one's called Fuck China. So, free Hong Kong, free the Muslim Uyghurs from Chinese oppression. Fuck Apple for removing the HKMap.live app and lying about why. Fuck the NBA's appeasement of China. Fuck Blizzard for banning the Hong Kong Hearthstone player. Fuck Chinese censorship and its Western accomplices. Fuck the Chinese government, they are tyrannical communists. Mao Zedong was evil. The 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre was evil. So there was a bunch of stuff about China and censorship in the news and whatever. I wanted to take a stand, to say where I stand. You know, I support the Hong Kong protesters, etc. Some of the Western companies were behaving badly, so I wanted to call them out, including Apple, and Blizzard, both of which I like in general. And I wrote this other post on Blizzard speech suppression. So there's a Hearthstone player from Hong Kong. Hearthstone is a Blizzard game. Blizzard is a software game development company. And he said free Hong Kong or something like that on stream. He made like a 8-word political statement, something like that. And he got banned, and they took away his prize money, and like a month later or something, they gave the prize money back and shortened the ban from a year to 6 months, because they're trying to please like both sides of the issue. Anyway, some US Hearthstone players held up a Free Hong Kong Boycott Blizzard sign. And Blizzard wasn't sure what to do at first because they're in the US and the US has free speech. So Blizzard delayed a decision because punishing Americans for political speech that most Americans approve of. Like, not only do Americans want free speech, they also agree with the particular message, like they're pro-Hong Kong. So the speech is not even offensive in America. It's only offensive to foreign communists. So Blizzard wasn't sure what to do. However, they decided to ban them. So the US, American people, got banned for their political speech in America. Blizzard has a justification for the ban. Quote, this is a quote from the article that describes Blizzard's justification. So Blizzard has a general rule that states the company can punish players for, and now it's quoting Blizzard, quote, engaging in any act that, in Blizzard's sole discretion, brings you into public disrepute, offends a portion or group of the public, or otherwise damages Blizzard's image. So the reason I wrote a post about this is it's just such a bad rule. It's so generic. Like, anything that offends any portion or group of the public, Blizzard is allowed to ban you for. They're just saying they have arbitrary power and they'll do whatever the fuck they want. And the rules are totally unfair and bullshit. And I'd like to live in a world where there was actual competition for this stuff. Like, players flocked to game companies that had better, more reasonable rules than this, that they would actually like harm them in the market and harm their sales, so they would have better, more rules that are more compatible with American values, instead of just like their rules are like, we're a tyranny, and everyone's just like, whatever, I don't read the rules, I don't care. And then people get mad when Blizzard does something like this, because instead of like expecting Blizzard to have good written rules in the first place, what everyone does is they expect Blizzard to follow unwritten rules about what sort of social pressures exist and what backlash there is. So it's like Blizzard won't ban people if they think the backlash will be too much. So Blizzard is controlled not by their written rules, which just say they can do whatever they want, but by public opinion, and that's a bad system. Like, there ought to be predictable written rules, not we can do whatever we want, like, arbitrarily, but if you do X, we will do Y, like, in all cases, not just selectively. And that'll tell people what's going on in advance, so outcomes are more predictable. It's very similar to how a government should have written laws that are consistently and fairly enforced. When you have laws that are too broad and like everyone's a criminal, then the government gets to play favorites and be biased by selectively enforcing it against only some criminals. And to some extent, it's not the government's choice. Like, public opinion does it too, but it's bad for who's a criminal to be determined by public opinion, because the law says everyone's technically a criminal. So then public opinion just makes up who's the real criminal. Like, that's a bad system. That's not a system of law and order. You see the same thing on internet forums where people have discussions, like subreddits or PHPBB forums. There are frequently some written rules that the moderators say are the rules, but the moderators routinely, one, allow some violations of the written rules, and two, crack down on people who do things that do not violate the written rules. So any kind of system like that in life is really bad, and it makes social dynamics a much larger factor. It makes what happens get determined a lot by not does it violate the rules or not the written rules, but what is socially acceptable. That is how a lot of things are determined, is social acceptability rather than written rules. And no one wants to write down how social acceptability works, and it changes, and there's irrationality built into it that people don't want to face and introspect about and analyze. Alright, if you liked this video, press the like button, the thumbs up, and that will make YouTube's algorithm show the video to more people in the future so more people see it. And if you're interested in my ideas, go to elliotttemple.com. It's in the description, along with the links to the posts I just went over.